I believe we are live. Alrighty then. Hey guys, what's up? It is Sizzant here. Just thought that we would spend a little bit of time together this afternoon, or morning, or evening, or middle of the night, wherever you happen to be. Thought we might spend a little bit of time together, just doing some stitching, just hanging out, just chewing the fat, shooting the shit, having a chat, and let's get some stitching done. I happen to have an incredible amount of stitching that I need to get done because I've made way too many of the same costrel. So all I'm going to be doing is saddle stitching along here. Let's get us right up on the action. Yeah, that looks about good to me. I hope that everyone has been having a good week. It is 5 PM on Friday here in Australia, well, at least here in Sydney's time zone. So the end of yet another week. I do hope that sound's coming through properly because I don't like what the webcam is doing to my forehead. It's not normally that reflective, I swear. However, we do require to have we do require to have a lot of lighting going on if you guys want to be able to see what's happening in here. So all I'm doing at the moment is just finishing off a seam that I started a while ago, several weeks ago actually, on this costrel. I'm just adjusting it in the stitching pony and stitching along as I go. I don't know if I'm the only one who does this, but I'll find that if I get halfway through a seam and I'm just not feeling it anymore, I'll just put it down. This has been sitting here with these needles literally just hanging out of the hole that I got up to in the stitching. And now I feel like catching up on it. Feel like doing a little bit of saddle stitching. Feel like catching up with you guys. How's it been? I did have a good thing going there, uploading one video a week for a little while, and unfortunately that is not the case anymore. The tutorial series is still set to continue on, but we obviously have not gotten up to the edge treatment part yet. So here's some fresh, steamy content in a vlog format where all I've got to do really is just stand here and fill the dead air with my voice, and my loving, caring audience, that is a skill that I have always possessed. So kill two birds with one stone, show that I'm not dead. I'm not. New South Wales has opened up, perhaps more quickly than I would have liked after a very extended lockdown, but I remain in good health. I am still here. I just need to catch up on a lot of stitching. And we're going to go around here. So when I'm stitching around a shape like this, you'll have noticed that I'm, God, I'm really absolutely blown out in that inset camera, aren't I? This is a new webcam that I've just got mounted to the edge of my pegboard, so I'll have to fuck around with the settings on it until I can get it to cooperate and maybe make me look not quite so much like a child's drawing of a ghost, because I swear, I'm not that pale. But yes, as I am doing my stitching here, I'm just rotating the piece around in the stitching pony as I go. There's a bit of a complex shape that I'm doing here, this inset. And you know, as I'm going around this corner, I'm rotating it. As I'm getting up to the side, I'm rotating it. It's perched a little bit precariously in the stitching pony at the moment. think I've got it firmly enough that it should be right. This is not actually the piece that I have been working on for the tutorial for the beginner leathercraft video series. This is the piece that I used in the, this is one of the many pieces that I used in the live stream for Cozy. So I don't know what I'm going to do with all of these. I'm going to have something like 6 costrels by the time that I'm done. But that's fun, you know. That gives me a lot of spares. I'll be able to figure out something fun to do with them, whether I, you know, whether it's a giveaway that I organise or whether I take them to medieval fairs once those start happening again in my area. I was talking with a blacksmith who lives up in Sydney, actually, who mentioned that he would like to do some good old-fashioned bartering, trading some of my leather goods for some of his iron goods. And boy howdy, the fact that I have a friend who is a blacksmith in Sydney who was talking about bartering goods with me, you bet your ass that put a smile on my face. So that was a great deal of fun. So just continuing to work my way along the seam here. I'm really out of practice. I haven't touched my needles in like, God, about 2 weeks. Unfortunately, sometimes real life happens, and sometimes you're just lazy. No, I'm not going to talk negatively about myself. I shan't do that. Sometimes real life happens, and look, sometimes you just need to spend a period of time sitting on your bum and recovering. And I didn't realize how much I needed to recover. Yep. So a little bit precarious in the stitching pony there. That's going to happen when, you know, the jaws are this big and I'm only grabbing onto like the absolute very edge of the leather, but we are going to continue to do it this way. Now, Grant, I hear you ask, hypothetical viewer, my nemesis, I hear you ask, why are you having it around this way? Why don't you just flip it and have the jaws bite onto this part? This seems needless, really. And to you I say, that's a very good question, actually, and I would have done it that way not that long ago. One of the best tips that I ever got that improved my saddle stitching, I was going to say the output of my saddle stitching, but I mean, that's a pretty reductive way to look at it, I think. One of the best tips that I ever got that improved my saddle stitching was to always stitch toward yourself. And I can't tell you how much of a difference that made. I heard the tip and I thought, you're full of shit, mate. There's no way that it makes that much of a difference going toward myself or away from myself, so I'm not going to bother. I gave it a try, and believe it or don't, it absolutely made a difference. It was crazy. There's something about when you are stitching toward yourself, the pressure that you put on the threads is it's just more even. It's just a much nicer, more even force that you can exert on the piece that you're working, which really does make all the difference, because I've said it before and I'll say it again right now and in the future. I'm holding on to that to use for later. Saddle stitching is an iterative technique. I'm sure that you've noticed if you're looking at the screen that I've just been doing the same thing over and over and over, and I don't know, I think there's something a little bit beautiful about that we're just iterating. We're practicing the same kick 10,000 times, as it were. Where was I going with this? Oh, right. The uniformity of the pressure that you can exert over the thread when you stitch toward yourself rather than away from yourself. Just having a little bit more of uniformity in your technique will yield such an incredible end result. It's It's crazy. It's straight up nutty. And so I really would recommend, if you are planning on getting into, trying to avoid getting into, or have already gotten into leather crafting and you're looking to level up your saddle stitch game, seriously stitch towards yourself. Give it a try. If you just sort of do whatever, or you have been stitching away from yourself, call me out, see how well it works, because I reckon you will be very pleasantly surprised at your results. So I've just finished this run. Now I have shown this before, but let's get a nice close up with this schmancy new camera of mine. Oh, sorry about that. Scooch that over there. Rack that all the way in. You know what, let's focus this manually. Because my camera, oh Lord, it is trying, but it is struggling. So, to finish off a seam, I have gone all the way down here, up here, along here, and back down. Normally what I'd do is I'd go back a stitch or two on the thread when I reach the end of the seam. But because this one is circular, much like time is not, I'm just going to go over the first 2 stitches in the seam just to tie everything together. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my main hand needle, and when I put it through this hole, I'm not just going to shove it through this hole, but I'm actually going to try and pierce the thread here. And hopefully you can see that decently. Nope. There we go. Let's actually take that out and get that. So you can hopefully see there that that needle is piercing through the thread that is already going into that hole. And what that means is it is going to tie itself into a very lovely knot, and it is going to be almost impossible for that thread to become unraveled. And what's also almost impossible is just pulling it through with your bare hands. So, oh, let's get that back in focus, Grant. Oh, look at that consummate professional. So I'm just going to be using some little needle nose pliers. You can actually grab onto the back of the needle and just push it through if you've got pliers that are particularly grippy, or grab onto the rear and just pull. Not yanking on it, just sort of trying to use the structure of the stitching pony as a little bit of a lever against which you can pull. Oof, it is warm in here. And then I'm just going to be doing the same thing from the back. Just pushing this through. Oh God, I am sweating. There we go. So there's one. And you know what, let's do 2. Let's go back 2 threads, because this is right where the mouth of the bottle is going to be. And so this is going to have all kinds of strain when we shape it and when the stopper is put in it. The stopper is going to be a friction fit that's going to go into this bottle. So we want to make sure that this seam is nice and tough here, and you will be able to see as the needle point emerges, it's doing so again from actually in the middle of that thread. Now, if you stitch your stuff with a if you stitch your stuff with a, God damn it. If you stitch your stuff with a nylon thread, of course you can just burn it, cut it off and just hold a lighter near it, and that will cause the ends of the thread to sort of melt into one big blob that won't come undone. I don't use nylon thread, I use waxed linen thread, and so I am just going to snurp it as close to the seam as I can. And isn't that just absolutely lovely? Zoom out so we can see the whole thing. So now we've got a costrel stitching complete. Got one continuous seam running all the way around the outer edge. One running all the way around the inner edge, and then we've got these little eyes on the side. So this one is actually ready for wet forming right now. So we can put that to the side. And get the next cab off the ranks. And how did that get marked? That's really disappointing. Oh well. And if you have been following the leather crafting tutorials, you may well recognize this. This is the costrel that I have been using in the tutorials. You can tell from how absolutely filthy the edges still are, very gross and fluffy, but we've got one line of stitching going all the way around, and I've got the next line punched, prepped, and ready. So why don't we jump into this? OBS tells me that I'm dropping a lot of frames, but YouTube seems pretty happy with the connection. Why is that? Fiddle-dee-dee, why is that? Oh, you know what, it's probably fine. Yeah, why not fiddle with your settings in the middle of the stream, Grant? I think that's pretty professional. People do that all the time, right? Okay. Let's get some thread. So, I have mentioned before, the length of thread that you're going to want to cut on something depends on how much thickness you're going to have. So obviously, I'm going to want enough thread to go all the way around here. So you'd think that that length times 2 would get you, because we're, you know, starting the thread at the halfway point, using 2 needles and working our way back along the seam. Not so, because you also have to consider the distance that the thread travels going from one side of the leather to the other. And that's considerable, because every single stitch, you're eating up another 6 mil in this case. Each of these pieces is 3 mil thick. So you're eating up 6 mil, so really you're eating up 12 mil, because it's 6 mil on each of the threads. So you get sort of a mind for estimating this sort of thing. I know that for a thickness like this, I'm going to need about 4 times the length of the seam in thread. So what I like to do is literally just space the thread out on the piece along the seam, because I don't like wasting thread, you know, which is silly. It's waxed linen thread. It's not like it's going to put me out of house and home if I end up using more than I need. But I also do like to be pretty generous with my estimates, because there's nothing like making it about 90% of the way along the seam and then running out of thread. Anyone who has used a sewing machine and had a bobbin give up on them when you weren't expecting it will certainly know some of that pain. And with pieces like this where I'm being stubborn and insisting on just having a single seam around the entire thing, of course that is going to make it more difficult for myself just because of the length of thread. I'm going to have an awful lot of thread just spilling out over the room. But as you progress along the seam, that problem solves itself pretty quickly. You know what? Let's cut heaps. Let's cut heaps and heaps and heaps. And this is a waxed linen thread, but I'm just a sucker for beeswax, and so I'm going to get my little extraordinarily used and abused piece of beeswax, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the thread through that. So we'll just hold the beeswax in one hand, hold the thread down on it, and just pull it through in one direction. It going through the leather, being pulled in both directions. Just going to pop my needles on now. Needle number 1. I like to just pinch the end of the thread into a chisel point. Pinch the end of the thread into a chisel point. Just pop it through the eye like that. There we go, another thing of beauty. Just sails right through the eye of the needle. Actually, you know what? It is very warm here and I'm going to get myself a cool drink. Okay. So I'm going to start in the hole of the... I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start one hole up. No, I'm not going to do that because that's already been backstitched and that's already very crowded. Yeah, no, we can make it work. There's room for one more needle in there. There we go. And of course, because there's already some thread in that hole, I'm just going to need to grab my pliers. That's right. Oh yeah, you can see really clearly on the back of it. That this thread is coming through the thread that already existed in there, which is good. That's absolutely what we want to happen. We want that to be thoroughly tied in a knot, because the last thing that you want when you're putting a seam in is to have the seam come out. I'm sure there are applications where you would want the seam to come out, but I am not across those applications. All right, now comes the... It's not really difficult, it's just kind of obnoxious. Now comes the obnoxious part. When you've got this much thread, is getting it even. So I want a bit more on this side. Come on. Okay, and I've pulled that out so that we are nice and even on both sides. And I'll do that again after the first stitch, just because I am a paranoid android. Might move the camera. I'm becoming less and less happy with this placement. That's not ideal, is it? See if we can show off a little bit better what's going on. Now, this hole's going to be a big old mess. So I've got to not beat myself up too much about where it goes, because there's already a lot of thread in there. Let's move you over here. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's a little bit special, isn't it? And now, again, it's just a matter of the iterative process. Ball goes in, thread comes out. Needle goes in, we're just casting the needle on the offhand side. And then pulling in the apt directions. I know that a lot of people, it seems to me that a lot of leatherworking patterns online, oh my god, this is so much nicer. It seems to me that a lot of leatherworking patterns online tend to have circular holes. They're shown as circular, and they're meant to either be punched or drilled depending on the thickness of the leather. I don't know, there's just something about these repeating diamond section holes and that sort of repeating diagonal thread that you get when you stitch with them that is so lovely. It's so aesthetically pleasing to me. I just don't know why you'd want to use round holes when you can make something look like this. This is so much more supple than the previous piece. So the next step that I'm going to do after stitching this in the beginner tutorial series, the next video that you've got to look forward to is edge treating. But I do just want to have all of the seams of this stitched up before we get to the edge treating. You know, like you want to be done with one step before you move on to the next, and clearly, as you can see, I'm not done with step number 1 on this. Well, actually, step number 3. Step 1 was cutting. 2 was gluing. My laptop has decided to turn the fan on to like 1000%, so I hope that that's not coming through the microphone, because that would be super frustrating. I'm sure that there's a way to monitor the audio of my stream, but to be honest with you, I go live so infrequently that I don't really know what that might be. Why is that? Actually, I didn't even go over the process for marking these holes on the inside. Because the holes on the outside, you can just use your calipers or your wing dividers or what have you, and rest one edge on the outside. But you may be able to tell from the from the mark that I've left on this, that hopefully will be covered with thread by the time that I'm done. You may be able to tell from that mark that that's absolutely not what I did to mark these lines out before I poked the holes. What I did was simply lay the pattern out on top of it, and the pattern had some lines traced on it that I just pushed down on with a stylus. That's the lovely thing about veg tan leather. Well, it's one of the many lovely things, apart from it has a pleasant smell. One of the many lovely things about veg tan is that since it is an unsealed leather, you don't really need to get too caught up in how to mark it. You really don't need to tie yourself in knots trying to figure out how to leave an impression on it. Quite the opposite, actually. You probably should tie yourself up in knots trying to figure out how not to scratch it up and leave unintentional marks on it, which, you know, just between you, me, and the wall, I've done once or twice. Which is all well and good because, you know, I'm usually cosplaying Geralt, going to a medieval fair, and a little bit of scratching, you know, it adds character, it tells the story. etc., etc. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. A poorly made item and a weathered, worn-in item look totally different. And that's true of any item. You know, look at your favorite t-shirt, your nicest t-shirt that you've had for 5 years and should have thrown out by now, and look at how it's weathered. Look at how the collar starts to get a little bit bleached. The seams that sit proud start to get a little bit of different color because when you put a jacket on, it's rubbing on it differently. You know, look at the way that that gets weathered. The signs that it's become weathered. And then look at a brand new t-shirt that is crap. That is poorly and cheaply made. I'm not trying to cast any shade on thoroughly underpaid garment workers, but the point is, if you look at a poorly made t-shirt, it looks bad because the seams are wrong. You can see the stitching running up. Things are uneven. The collar is uneven. It's got fluff coming out of it. You know, the manner in which it is, the manner in which that item is imperfect is very different to the manner in which a worn-in item is imperfect. And that's important to remember, you know, if you are weathering items. I think I first heard that one from Todd Cutler on one of his many insightful videos about making stuff. God, what I wouldn't do for a workshop like Todd's. One day, maybe. But for now, I will work in my apartment study where the webcam is still just freaking out. It's like, here looks okay. I almost look like I have skin like a normal human does. And then I lean over like this and it's like, oh, is that forehead a whiteboard? Here, let me just pick the white balance up off of your forehead. And then I lean back. It's like, oh, a human again. No worries. It is what it is, you know. So again, you'll see that as I've been working my way along this curve, I have just rotated the costrel a couple of times. I'm using the word costrel and bottle fairly interchangeably. And as I get up to this corner, I'm going to just rotate at 90 degrees. So, well, here's a fun little tidbit that I can expand upon. As we approach the corner, these stitches are still oriented in a lefty-righty direction, whereas this next hole is oriented in an uppy-downy direction. When you're turning such a corner, the first thing that I'm going to do is bump the camera and give you all motion sickness, so you're welcome. The next thing that I'm going to do is align it for the stitch hole that I'm putting the thread through. And I know that that sounds like a simple thing, but look, I've gotten confused by simple things before, and hopefully I'm not alone in that one. And, you know, if I'm not, then hopefully I've made you feel less alone as well, hypothetical viewer. So, because this stitch hole is running along this edge, I've got this edge up as I'm stitching it, going in, grabbing the needle on the other side, pushing that through, pulling it through with my dominant hand, casting it, and then I'm pulling it in the same direction that I would for this stitch hole, which is down toward me in my dominant hand, up and away from me in my non-dominant hand. If I were pretending that it was an extension of that line, I would be pulling like up past my head and down into the table, but that will make the thread wind up in the wrong spot on the stitch hole. I know that this is all really pedantic, but the look of something like this really does come down to the thread being in the right spot on every stitch hole, because then the entire thing looks good and consistent. And if you have a couple of stitch holes that are wrong, it spoils the whole run. I'm sorry, but it does. Why does it sound like this thing wants to launch into orbit? Yeah, this is really starting to cark it, huh? Oh well. I wonder why it's basically dying now, and I managed to stream for Cozy just fine. I haven't changed anything in my setup. Oh god, now it's out of focus. Come on, work with me here. Stay. So now that I have correctly aligned myself with this part of the seam, this part's fairly straight, so it's just more of the same. You can see we've barely covered any distance in terms of the amount of seam that I've done, but we have managed to use up quite a good deal of thread. And you'll see that as I pull, push, cast, and pull my threads, that one pull is getting frighteningly close to getting all the way there. So, like I said, the problem of having too much thread and just having sort of thread everywhere on these long seams, it does tend to solve itself fairly quickly. And I personally prefer doing it this way rather than to just have little bits and pieces of overlapping seam. Good morning, Meredith. How are you? I'm pleased that you could join me. I hope that you're having a lovely coffee, tea, or miscellaneous warm beverage of your choice. It is, of course, 20 to 6 over here and very warm, so I'm enjoying a refreshing Four Pines Pacific Ale. Are you allowed to drink on YouTube? Tasting History does it all the time. If Max Miller can do it, so that's a lie. That's a lie. I can't do nearly all of the things that Max Miller does. That man is a treasure. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that some of the words that I'm saying are helpful tips, because honestly, I just lose track. I just start talking. I like it. And I will just say, because I've highlighted the fact that I'm drinking alcohol, that I never, and you should never, ever be anything less than 100% stone cold sober if you are using any sharp implements. If I'm going to open the sheaths on my leatherworking knives, I will never ever do that with a beer in hand. But leatherworking needles are blunt as, so I'm in no danger of hurting myself here, so don't worry about that. Now, talking about terminating that last seam, how we wanted to pierce through the thread, I kind of glossed over the, I kind of glossed over this in the little stitching tutorial that I put together, because there's only so much that you can put in a 5-minute video, right? And I mean, that video ran a lot longer than the previous 2 tutorials as it was, but I've got time to expound on it now, so I shall. What we want to avoid while we're just saddle stitching normally is, after I put the awl through and I find the tip of my offhand needle and I lead that through, this hole now has thread in it, and I'm about to put a needle through it. So what we want to avoid at all costs is for this needle to go through this thread. And there are a couple of ways that you can avoid that. The way that you might see me doing is I've got my middle and index finger on either side here. Actually, let's get you to focus a little bit better, shall we? Perfect. No, better. Good. I'll get 2 fingers on either side and I'll just pull it back, and you'll see that this thread is now parked in the rear corner of this stitching hole. And that means that if I push this up against the front of that stitching hole, it'll go through basically without incident. The other thing that you do to assist in the thread not getting caught is casting it. And now I'm going to give you a motion sickness again and move the camera back. Let's really get to the offhand side, shall we? We haven't really seen it yet. Come on, Grant, get your life together. We'll call that good. Hello, Gillian. Hello, Annette. Thank you for joining me. What I'm making is a costrel, or a leather drinking bottle, one of several. I'll show you in a second. But just to continue my thought about ways that we can avoid accidentally tying a knot. So you can see that this needle and this thread, they're going through the same hole, and I can move them back and forth, and that means that very clearly they're not interrupting each other. The needle has not pierced the thread. What I do on the offhand side is called casting the thread. I just put a loop around it. Just in case you missed it, let's get an action replay. I'm holding it toward me, whoop, just around the tip of the needle. Literally just around the tip of the needle, and then I don't even hold onto the loop. You can see it hanging slack here. And as I pull this away from me and pull this one toward me, what casting the thread does is this thumb is A, is help prevent the thread from getting tangled, and B is make the rear side of it have this repeating pattern that we're after. Let's put that on autofocus. So if you don't cast the thread, the rear side of the seam will overlap and kind of piggyback itself, and you won't get that crisp diagonal line that I keep raving and ranting about and saying that I like so much. Ah! From New Zealand, Kia ora, how you doing? Yes, the needles are extraordinarily blunt, so is this particular awl that I'm using. This is like a little ballpoint awl. I could probably draw blood with this if I tried, but you certainly couldn't draw blood with these needles if you tried. Like, they're very, very blunt. And the needles are blunt because we punch the holes first. Leather is so thick that for the needles to be sharp enough to actually do the piercing work on their own, like, you'd have to put some kind of superhuman effort in. I'm just going to grab another light. Alrighty then, because that looks a little bit dim to me. So what if I put this light here, such as like that, and then were to plug that into power, thus washing my sort of face out even more, but making this a little bit clearer what we're doing here. Alright. That's what we're aiming at. Lovely. Thank you, camera. So, best practice. I feel like I should tell you guys best practice, even though I don't always do it. Another step that you can do to prevent your needles from tying themselves in knots is, once we get to the point that we're going to push the main hand needle through, as you push the main hand needle through, give this thread a tug. So they're both moving in a, well, to me, they're both moving to the left at the same time. Because if I push this through on its own, there's every chance that it could pierce that thread. But if this thread is moving along with it, obviously it can't then pierce it. That's potentially... Oh, I didn't cast that thread. That's potentially a little bit of overkill. You know what? Let's redo that. Let's just do over. I don't always pull the offhand thread as I'm pushing the main hand needle through. It's just kind of, to me, it's not always necessary. Because when I'm working with these big old 4mm pricking iron holes, there's a lot of real estate in there, you know, there's plenty of room for the needle and the thread, so it's not totally necessary in my opinion, but you know, it is best practice. It's what you should be doing if you're trying to, you know, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But you know, there'll be purists who stick their nose up in the air about basically anything, so there you go. Forewarned is forearmed, I suppose. I'm really not liking that angle that much now that I've shown you how to cast it, so let's get the camera back somewhere that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Hup. There we go. This is actually... I treated myself. I treated myself and got a new camera. And honestly, I'm happy with it so far. It's performing admirably. It's streaming quite well, which is good. I tried to get like a multicam thing set up so we could have like a couple of different angles, but I'm only an IT professional. I can't work out things like that. Thank you, Annette. I have no idea how to spell Kiora. I like to think that I can pronounce it well. I used to, in another life, the reason that I have streaming software on my computer is because I was a commentator. I was a Dota 2 shoutcaster. I was the action caster. I worked with a lot of people, and one of the groups of people that I worked with was a casting studio from New Zealand, and so I had a lot to do with a lot of Kiwis. And then as life has moved on, I'm actually now working with another group of Kiwis for the New Zealand cosplayer magazine, the Con Artist magazine, which I'm incredibly proud of. I actually have a leathercrafting tutorial coming up in the next issue that I think you can order in the next couple of months. If you're interested in a cosplay magazine that comes from New Zealand, keep an eye on my socials. I'm on Instagram at Sisant. There's a Sisant Facebook page as well, and rest assured that I'll be bleating loudly from the hills when that is coming out, because there's nothing that I like quite so much as being able to call myself a published writer. Thank you, Gillian. Look, you know, I try not to blow my own horn too much, he says, after just having gone on and on about being a published writer. But I do like to think that I stitch a good saddle. Saddle a good stitch? I do like to think that my leather crafting is pretty okay. Where did that get caught? That's okay. Woof. Sometimes this is a good learning. This is a good learning opportunity. Sometimes what can happen, I'm not really adjusting where this is in the jaws. You can see that I'm stitching past the jaws a little bit. And sometimes what can happen, these are wooden jaws that I've put some very thin chrome tanned leather over to make the jaws even softer. What can happen, see how all my threads are dangling down here? As I start to pull them, they want to move up. I'm pointing with my pinky now. They want to move up, but they also want to move in orthogonally. And what can happen is that they will slide in that tiny little crack between the piece and the jaws. and they'll get caught, and you'll think to yourself, oh god, there's a knot somewhere and I'm going to tear something and I'm going to ruin... Oh no, it's just stuck in the jaws. It's totally fine. Oh, that's right. I promised to look at all of the other ones of what I'm making. Oh, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Just before I start that next one. So here is the finished product. This is a leather costrel. This has the, I think this is Igni. This has the Igni sign from The Witcher put on it, which means fire, which just tickles me so thoroughly for me like putting whiskey in this in the future. This is hardened with beeswax. It's shaped and wet formed. This one has been stitched, edge treated, carved, and had a little leather thong put through it for me to hang off of something. This one's got a few stains on it, which I'm pretty unhappy about, to be honest with you. And then we've got 3 more blanks in varying stages of completion. We've got this happy customer that's all stitched up and ready for wet forming. Actually, not quite ready for wet forming because I do want to carve all of them. Then we've got this one, which is partially punched. And then this one, which is only just glued together. So, hang on, that means that I'm going to have 5. There are 5 Witcher signs, I think. I'll be able to put a different sign on each of them. That'll be fun. Maybe I'll give them to other Witcher cosplayers that I meet at fairs and whatnot when those are allowed again. That could be a bit of fun. Maybe I should give the Igni one to the blacksmith because, you know, blacksmithing, fire, you know, like working with forges and whatnot. I think Igni, the fire sign, is fitting for a blacksmith. So, yeah, the New Zealand Cosplayer magazine, I'll just read out their Instagram handle. What are they? Yes, they have an Instagram where they publish a lot of photos from, you know, different conventions in New Zealand. They also come over to Australia. Well, they came over to Australia when that was possible for PAX. It is conartist_mag. I'll just put that in the chat, actually. Conartist_mag. That's them on Instagram if you want to look for them. And I'm not saying that just because I've been featured on the page before. They really do have some great cosplayers. So I'm just going to shift this up in the grips. Now, the thing about going around a corner like this is that, again, I'm just going to have to rotate it 1,000,001 times to get where I need to. And I've clamped it over the thread again. I'm just going to have to keep rotating it, and then this is going to be movement by degrees, but this is just part of the territory, you know. This is... Oh, isn't that lovely? We're finally getting to the point where I can pull the full thread through in one stroke of my arms. Ugh. I should be practicing this with my diamond section all. I need to get more practice with that stupid thing. But... Thank God I got such a big old set of wings on me. This is comfort stitching, you know. I like my little ballpoint awl. I like my little blunt needles. I like this thread. This is really nice thread. I don't want to learn something new. I've just had a full week at work. It's Friday afternoon. I'm going to do something that just makes me happy. Take care, Annette. Thank you for dropping by. It's always a pleasure interacting with the chat. just working your way around here. Well, it's only taken me about half the way around this costrel, but I think I've actually run out of things to say just that are floating through my mind about leather crafting. Which, you know, you get that. I do the action 10 million times, but there's only so much to say. So, in an ideal world, I would have done the carving on this when it was just a flat piece. I probably would have done the carving on this before I even cut it out. But, seeing as I'm doing a tutorial video series for beginners who want to get into leather crafting and know nothing about it, so I'm doing a video series where I want to be the hand that you hold. I thought that... Come on, you donkey. I thought that starting off with tooling and carving would be a little bit of a tall order, and I thought that having the piece be cut out with a design already carved into it and just have to say, I'll get to this later, I'll get to this later, I thought that that might be a little bit unsatisfying. I didn't turn my alarm off before I started streaming because I am a consummate professional and I know what I'm doing. I should be right. Yes, so the plan is that once this has finished having its edges treated and brought up to a nice mirror shine, ooh, which I can actually show off to you because I've got one right here. Thank God I prepared all of these ones earlier. As you can see, focus. This is like squeaky when I rub my finger across it. You can see it catching the light. This is shiny. And that's the kind of edge that you can get up to from a place that's like fuzzy like this and crappy like this. So it always absolutely puts a smile on my dial when I get to do some edge treatment, because that's the point at which, I don't know, it really elevates the point. How do I keep my hands from getting tired? I'm gonna apologize in advance because you're not gonna like the answer to this, but it's to just keep doing it. I'm sorry. I wish that there were a better answer. If you've got those little squeezy doovies, the whatchamacallits, the hand workout things, I've heard that they can help, but I've been working in various trades, mechanical, electrical, since I was 18, so unfortunately I have just been used to hand tools and the strain that that puts on one's hands. So I'm really sorry, I'm actually not the right person to tell you how to get up to that point, because that's kind of the point that I started from. What I can tell you though is that moving into leatherworking, I developed some really interesting calluses. You can see, well maybe you can see if I move my hand back into frame, when I'm pulling this string, the way that it sort of wraps around my pinky as I pull on it. When I was making my jerkin that was like quilted all over, I did so much stitching on that thing. I got calluses around the outside of like my pinky fingers just from pulling the thread there. So that's not to be like, you know, a hustle grind set of like, just keep going till you get it. But like, if you keep going, eventually you'll get calluses. And the day after you get to that point, your hands will ache and you won't be able to do anything. But the day after that, once the calluses have set in, it'll be 10 times easier. You'll just be going for hours and hours and hours, and you'll think to yourself, oh man, this would have really cramped my hands up before, but it's okay now. Sorry. At least that's my experience. My experience might not match yours, you know? It might be that you can get the little hand dumbbells and they will just work for you. Oh, that's ugly. Oh no, that's so ugly. Oh, gross. Yuck, 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 yuck. So what's happened here? Let's use this as a learning. Can you see what went wrong? What went wrong here is that I pulled on those threads way too hard, and this leather is soft. Like I said before, this leather is really supple. You can see how easily it bends and forms. This is going to be brilliant for wet forming and for waterproofing with beeswax. But I pulled too goddamn hard on it, and that's made the threads bite down really, really far into the hide. You can see that's like a channel in there, which really takes away from the aesthetic. It's not going to do anything structural to it, but it's just upsetting to me because I've really been on a roll up to that point. So that'll lead us into the learning. Don't pull too hard. You know, it's leather. You know, in this case, I'm stitching along this seam. There's already one row of stitching that exists there. This is a double row. It's already glued together. I don't need to pull it as hard as I can. I just need to pull it until I see it start to stress the leather, and then I stop. So something to keep your eye out for if you're working with really tough, old, like, stuff. Not that these other costrals are made of really grimy old leather, but they are a little bit thicker, so you can see they're less bendy and flexible. I can pull the thread through these with a lot more force. I can really lean on the thread when I've been doing these ones. This one is unfortunately, or fortunately, a little bit softer. So, you know, you work with the material that you have. I love that. I love that about leather, and I know that every craftsperson loves that about their craft, because a lot of materials are the same, that you can only work it the way that it wants to be worked. You know, I can't just make this leather behave as if it were some, you know, Italian buttero, or as if it were like a 4mm thick hardened piece of stuff that I could make armor out of. This hide is this hide, you know, it has a story up to this point. I'm helping tell the rest of its story. In this case, it's going to be a story about a costrel. And it is what it is, you know. I can't work this into something that it's not. And I don't know, I find that there's something lovely about that, you know. Where I obviously have an idea of what I want to make, but the thing that I'm making it out of has a mind of its own, and so we reach a compromise about what the final object's going to be. But you know, that could just be me being overly flowery, which I've been known to do. Oh, there we go. Got it. So, excuse me. Oh, I'm starting to get a heat warning on my camera, which is probably not a good thing. But let's carry on. Good night, Meredith. Thank you for dropping by. I enjoyed your company. So what we're aiming for, why am I pulling these threads in such specific directions, and why am I banging on and on about it? Offhand, ow. Offhand goes up and away from me. Main hand goes down and toward me. Why is that important? Well, it's because of the diamond sectioned stitching holes. These bad boys. Because they have a point that goes up and a point that goes down, we want for the thread to have its final resting place in those corners, because that's neat and tidy, and that is what gives us our repeating diagonal pattern of thread. So if you're stitching in circular holes, you don't need to worry about this part of it. You can just pull the thread however you gosh darn well please. But for me, part of what makes that aesthetic so lovely is getting that repeating, lovely repeating diagonal diamond section seam, and we just do that one stitch at a time. Look at that. Let's whip you around and get a look at that from a more straight on kind of angle. Is that going to work? You going to work? Yeah, you'll work. Look at that. All right, so my hand's going to get in the way when the awl goes in now, but you'll get a nice view when I pull the thread back. Yeah, how do you like that shot of my knuckles? Ooh. Oh, and the camera's even pulled focus on my hairy knuckles. Thanks, Canon. So, gonna snap focus again for me, bud. There we go. So you can see we've got both threads in the one hole, and as I pull them in, different directions, we're going to see them want to go into different sides of that hole. And you could just see that little curl of that thread just slip up into that top corner, which is exactly where we want it to go. Incidentally, that's also why when I pull the offhand needle through, so I'm up to the stage where my offhand needle's poking through, got my main hand needle, I want to grab it like this, with my main hand needle on the back. That's because this needle wants to go through that side. If I just grab this randomly, there's every chance that I look at it and I go, which thread is which needle is which. I'm going cross-eyed because I'm just kind of zoning out while I'm saddle stitching. I don't know where to put this through. If I grab it like this, if I form a little cross so that my main hand needle is always further away from me, when I go to push the main hand needle back through, it's already on that side. I can't easily get that wrong. And then I just cast it on the offhand side of the piece, and then as I pull, we'll see that little loop whip right up into the top corner. God, that's satisfying. That really does put a smile on my face. What are you beeping at me for? Well, in a way, this was a pretty good test of this new camera, because it's been shooting for... How long have we been live? More than an hour, Jesus. Been live for slightly over an hour. It hasn't heated up yet, and given that this is a mirrorless camera, it can only shoot for 29 minutes and 59 seconds at a time anyway. Not that I ever shoot that long at a time. So, all in all, pretty gosh darn good. P good. Okay. We'll try to get this seam finished, but we're certainly getting up to the time of night where it is turning into night. And of a night, yeah, pull focus, there you go. Of a night, I do need to eat. So again, because this thread is the one that I'm pulling with my offhand, as I pull it up and away, it wants to go up and away and into that corner. And this thread, I want to pull down and toward, and it wants to go down and toward into that corner. Isn't that just a thing of beauty? That is a mighty refreshing ale. That also caused me to bump the tripod, but it's fine, no one noticed. I feel like the done thing in Twitch when I, you know... Let me start that sentence again. The last time that I was into live streaming was on Twitch, and I feel like the done thing at that stage was to have like some tunes, some music going while you were streaming, just for people to groove to and enjoy, as folk do with music. But you know, that was years ago, and then Twitch got really on top of copyright striking, you know, VODs got blown up, streamers were just less likely to play copywritten music, and it's like, I'm streaming on YouTube, can I, like, if I even hum the theme to Happy Birthday, I'm pretty sure I'll get copyright struck. Copyright strucken. These extra lights are making it easier to see the project, but boy howdy, they make my forehead look like a whiteboard. I hate that. Maybe I should turn that camera off. I'm not sure how much you're getting out of seeing my big sweaty forehead, but you know, if you guys are enjoying that, if that's making you feel more cool by comparison, then all the better. Let's just shift this around. We're just going to lose that camera momentarily. Where's my battery? One moment. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, he's gone and done it. The absolute mad lad. Alright. Let's continue stitching. I want that to be manual. Yeah, dial it in. Dial it in, Grant. Beautiful. I do often wonder if, like, hardware problems are just, like, less of a thing in cold climates. Like, if I wanted to stream in Canada and the ambient temperature was like 0 degrees, surely my laptop wouldn't be trying to reach low Earth orbit like it is now. But, you know, that's just the wistful thinking of one pale Australian who hates the heat. Oh, thanks, Raina. Yeah. Maybe if I open the window behind me, it'll balance better. This is worth an experiment. Hey! Would you look at that? Well, golly gee, why didn't I do that from the start? Thanks for the tip. Also, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Raina? Although if it were German, then I think you would pronounce the I. Correct? Because auf Deutsch, one pronounces the second letter in the pairing of E and I. Work our way around this corner. So yes, as I'm going around, you're also getting just an absolute front row seat to the disgustingness of the edges of this piece. Oh, I'm glad to hear. Glad to hear that I was getting it right. You're getting a front row seat to just how grotty these are. Look at this little blit hanging off the side. Look at this uneven. Look at this straight edge on a curved edge. It's gross. Cop an eyeful. Get a real close look at that, because you'll be surprised at how much you can tune that up. So in the next tutorial video, when we go over the art, I can't say the art of edging. I can't say that. They'll strike the video down. When we go over the art of making the edge of your leather nice and shiny, you will see that it is really a way to make your piece look a lot more professional. I don't like the connotations that saying that something is professional has, because the contrast to professional is amateur, right? And I don't like that contrast. I feel like there are a lot of connotations in calling something amateur. And I'm not about that, you know. I don't mean to imply that one is amateurish, or that being an amateur, root for the love of, is a bad thing. I'm an amateur. I don't get paid for this. Are you kidding? But it will elevate your work. You will have work that will make people say, wow, did a professional do this with the best intentions possible? And the difference is the edge treatment of the leather. It's absolutely insane. You can have a piece that is dyed perfectly, that's the perfect hide, that's stitched perfectly with immaculate seams in a beautiful oiled finish, that if the edges are fuzzy, yikes. Whereas if you subtract 15 minutes worth of total effort from all of the other steps, you know, if you do your seams a little bit quickly, if you're kind of a bit dodgy about the oiling, you know, whatever. If you put 15 minutes of effort into your edges, they will be smooth and shiny, and if you want to paint them, they will have a glossy veneer, and people will see that, and that is what trains people to think that something is professional, right? We're all trained consumers at the end of the day. I don't want to pretend that advertising doesn't affect me, because it does. I'm a human, and my brain is a pile of fat that runs on electricity and chemicals. And advertising works on me. And one of the things that I've been trained by luxury brands, right? One of the things that I've been trained to do with leatherwork is to associate a nice glossy edge with refinement and with a high class, high quality product. And you can take advantage of that. Not in like a scummy way, but like in a way that is something that will make people think that a piece of leather is high quality. So if they're going to think that anyway, why wouldn't you do that to signal to people, hey, this is high quality? Kendrick, see, that's exactly why I pulled myself up on saying it and instead said it while winking at the camera, because I'm terribly mature, as you can tell. Oh, by the way, those of y'all outside of Australia and New South Wales, Victoria in particular, probably haven't been locked down for all that long, but if you have been locked down, if you have been isolating, how's your lockdown haircut going? Because mine, as you can tell, is it's not even really regrowth at this point. I just have two-toned hair now. I just have brown and white hair. So that's fun. I'm booked in November to get this whole mess sorted out. But you know, lockdown has been good for other things, and I don't want to complain too much. I know that a lot of people have things a shit ton of a lot worse than me. You know, like even just this, like I have a hobby that brings me a lot of joy that I can do inside. I have expensive toys that I'm able to set up multi-camera streams and stream and chat with people online. Like, I'm doing fine. There are a lot of people that are doing a lot worse, that are a lot closer to the breadline. There are a lot of people for whom home is not necessarily a safe place. Sorry to get really down and somber, but like, lockdown hasn't been good for a lot of people, and so for all of the complaining about lockdown that I'm doing it knowing that I've seen basically a disproportionate amount of silver edge to how dark the cloud was. Silver edge? Silver lining. God damn it, Kendrick, I got that word on the brain now. That word. But that's all coming to an end now. For those of you who are abroad, my state, New South Wales, has begun opening up, and fingers crossed by the end of the year we'll be able to travel not only our own state but into other states of Australia, which would be lovely because there are a lot of nice things in other states. And then, knock on wood, sometime after that, international travel will open, and I will get my passport out and absolutely wear a hole through it from overuse, because I caught the travel bug in 2019. It's unfair. It is unfair. At the end of 2019, I went on a international trip with some friends, and I thought to myself, God, this is all right. I could get used to this. Let's plan the next one. Boom, COVID. Forget about it. Oh well. You do get that. You do get that. Anyway, this leather crafting is going swimmingly. So, another thing that you might notice is these needles. I literally just have the thread pulled back on itself. I haven't bothered to tie a knot or anything. If you look at other leather crafters on YouTube or just, you know, various other places online, or heavens forbid in the meat space, you may notice that a lot of them will have a little trick for how they like to do a weird little knot or pierce the thread with their needle and pull it back on itself, and all this terribly clever and professional looking nonsense. But I'm here to tell you that if you grab the needle from like this point, if you grab the eye and you're pinching that thread behind it anyway, you don't need to. There's no reason to put a knot in it. It is something that takes how do I explain this? I said earlier that I don't need to worry about pushing this needle through at this time. I don't need to worry about pulling this thread back to ensure that it doesn't get knotted. And I said because there's so much room in that hole. If I did have some kind of knot tied at the base of my needles to keep the thread in there, that would necessarily be a bit more bulky. But Grant, yes, hypothetical viewer, what is it? All those other YouTubers, they have such fancy ways of tying their knots. It's practically no added bulk at all. Yeah, well, hypothetical viewer, once again, you raise a really good point, but it's still added bulk, isn't it? I want, when I'm stitching, when I'm doing leather crafting, I want my needles to be as uniform, as non-bulky as possible. I used to tie knots in my thread at the back of my needles, and I hated it because when you would get to a hole that was perhaps not punched quite right, operator error in that case, obviously. Oh. Or say that part of the leather was just more stiff than the rest of the hide, which happens all the time. It's heterogeneous material. It is a non-homogeneous material. Different parts of it are different thicknesses, supplenesses, stretchiness's. If you get up to a part of it that's quite hard and tough, you might find that there's less give in the stitching hole, and there's consequently less room. And I would forever be getting to a point in my stitching where I would go, all right, wool goes through, that's fine. Needle goes through, yeah, we're doing all right. Ooh, let me just, yeah, okay, that fit through. And then by the time that I went to put my second needle in, I would be going swimmingly, and I would get to here, and the knot would catch in the hole, and I would have to yank it, and that would undo the knot, that would make the needle go flying across the room. And look, I feel like an infomercial actor, you know, I feel like I'm really playing up what is, in the grand scheme of things, quite a minor inconvenience. But let me ask you this. How many stitch holes are in this costrol? I don't know. A couple hundred? Maybe? Maybe. What is a mild inconvenience that happens a couple hundred times? It's fucking annoying. It's a goddamn major inconvenience at that stage. And so, to me, it's just not worth the hassle. But you might be different. Maybe you've got a knot that works great for you. Maybe you're not working with such thick veg tan as I am. I know that I'm quite unusual for working with such thick veg tan among costumers. Not amongst leather crafters, amongst costumers, quite unusual for working with such thick veg tan. And that brings its own unique set of challenges. So, you know, if your use case is such that a knot at the end of your needle is more help than hindrance to you, not your needles, you know. I'm not here to be prescriptive. I am trying to offer advice, obviously. I want to try and make life easier for you, dear viewer. But, you know, at the end of the day, I can only encourage you to try something, and if that something doesn't work, then all that I can do is try and gaslight you and say, no, I didn't tell you to try that. What are you talking about? That must have been someone else that said that. That wasn't me. But, yes. I do certainly encourage you to go and try shit, you know? If if you've always just stitched toward or away from yourself without a care in the world, and you heard me talking about stitching toward yourself and how it's the best thing since tummy rubs, I encourage you to try it. You know, your next leather crafting project, make a conscious effort to always stitch towards yourself. And if you get to the end of it and you think, wow, Sizzin really was just full of crap, wasn't he? This made absolutely no difference and was a lot of effort for no gain. Don't do it again, but you tried, you know? It's if you try something and it's no better, then there's no loss. There's no cost and no, well, I mean, okay, there's a cost associated with everything, but you know, there's no loss. If you try something and it didn't work as well as what you were doing, you've lost a bit of time, whatever materials, blah, 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 blah. But if you try something and it works better, then that's a huge reward. You know, the risk reward ratio is very heavily skewed in favor of trying things. That's all I'm saying. God, have I really been running my mouth for an hour and a half? We are nearing the end, my friends. We're nearing the end of this seam. I'll pull the plug on the stream when we get there. Thank you for everyone who joined me, kept me company, put a few questions in the chat. I had a lot of fun. I hope that you guys did too. It was nice seeing a couple of familiar faces and a couple of new ones. You know, and all of that crap that YouTubers say at the end of videos. Smash the screen, right? Smash your device against the ground. That's what they say. And don't forget to ring your nan and check up on her. It's been too long. See how she's going. And don't forget to subscribe to The Guardian. They do a lot of great independent journalism. They need the money. Oh no, you know what's terrible about the webcam actually displaying my skin tone properly? Is that y'all can see how absolutely glistening I am. It is... Hey Google, what's the weather like today? Let's find out how hot it is.
It's 18 and mostly cloudy. Tonight, the forecast is around 14 degrees and mostly cloudy.
It's absolutely not 18 degrees, I can tell you that for a fact. Alright, we're coming up on the end here, and I'm going to finish this seam the same way that I started. And don't you, dear viewer, just love this. Look at how much thread I've got left. Look at this nonsense. I don't look. Stay tuned for the musical stylings of my own horn, but I fucking nailed that. God, that is a good feeling when you get to the end of a seam and there's just the right amount of thread left. Isn't that just a nice note to finish on? Cast that one. All right. Hey, Sizzin. Yeah? I wasn't here at the start of the stream. How do you finish a seam? Good question. Let's end the stream with that. Swing you around here. I don't think it gets more zoomed in. Turn that light off. Actually, no. That gives some good contrast. Yeah, that looks all right. You're very welcome, Raina. Thank you for dropping by. Annette, I always say that my hobby is collecting hobbies. It lets you get away with doing whatever you want. So, how do you finish a seam? Same way as sewing. I think if you're hand sewing, you want to tie a knot, right? And if you're machine sewing, you want to go backwards a little bit. which is tying a knot. You know, purposefully going back along the seam is the same as tying a knot. And we are going to tie a knot. And we're going to tie a knot the same way that I was talking about avoiding earlier. We are purposefully going to pierce through this thread. How's that showing up? You can see, I hope to God you can see. Okay, focus is good. You can see that my needle is actually piercing in between that thread. You can see a little bit of the white thread above and below the needle. It's very crowded in there, so I'm getting my pliers, pushing that through. Always be mindful of slip and strike injuries. You'll notice I'm keeping my body out of the way so that when the pliers do this, I'm not going to get stabbed with the needle. And I'm only going to go back a single thread on this one just because these thread holes are absolutely chock-a-block full of thread and I don't see the need to overload them anymore. So I'm just going to shove that one through, and you can see as it's come through on this side, it is piercing that thread. This is tying a knot. If you try and pull on, you know what, sod it, let's do two of them. If you cut the thread here and try and pull it, this is going to bind up against all of the thread around it because it's pierced through the middle. And if you've ever had a needle pierce through the middle of a thread, you'll know that it's way harder to get out than any knot that can be formed by humans. So why not take advantage of that? Just quickly rethread this needle that came off. What we do on this channel is we play thread chicken all day and we win every time. Like I said before, if you're using a synthetic thread, after you cut it, get a lighter, hold it up, and you'll melt it into a glob that will never come undone. I'm not using synthetic thread, so I'm just gonna snip, snap. And look at that. Absolutely. Look at that. We've got the nice line around the outside, got the lovely new line around the inside, save for the spot down here where I pulled too tight. I think that looks rather handsome, don't you? So, thank you guys very much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed watching this stream just as much as I did streaming it. I didn't really have anything planned for the end here, so I'll just end it with this. You guys take it easy.